Sometime in the next few days, if the court's schedule holds, roughly 500,000 authors are due to start receiving payments of about $3,000 each. The payer is Anthropic, maker of the Claude AI models. The bill is $1.5 billion, the largest copyright settlement in history, and the offense, in plain terms, is that the books were downloaded from pirate libraries and fed to a machine that learned to write by reading them. $3,000 once per book. That is the first real price tag ever attached to the question the entire AI economy is built on. What is your work worth to a machine that reads everything, and it has read everything? Your posts, your reviews, your code, your photos. Today on The Big Picture, the land grab for the data that trains every AI model, the scraping lawsuits, the licensing deals, the tollbooths going up around the open web, and the question underneath it all. Who actually owns the internet's brain and who gets paid? Start with what actually went into these models. A large language model is, at bottom, a compression of text, trillions of words of it, and there was only ever one place to get trillions of words of human writing: the internet. The first generation of frontier models was fed from giant web scrapes, like Common Crawl, a non-profit archive of billions of pages, plus Wikipedia, open-source code, forums, news sites, and, as court documents later confirmed, shadow libraries of pirated books with names like LibGen and Books3. For 15 years, the tech industry's working assumption was simple. If it is publicly visible, it is free to take. Nobody asked the people who wrote it because nobody had ever needed to. The web was treated as a natural resource, an ocean you could trawl forever. The land grab we are about to walk through started the day the industry realized that assumption was wrong in both directions. Legally, it was never quite free, and physically, it is not infinite either. Here is the fact that turned data from a background detail into a strategic asset. The internet is finite. The research firm Epoch AI has projected that the stock of high-quality, human-written public text will be effectively exhausted by the frontier labs somewhere between now and 2028. The best of the web has already been eaten, and compute keeps scaling while the words do not. Worse, the barrel is refilling with something else. A growing share of new pages published today, by some estimates most of them, are partly or entirely machine-written, so labs scraping the open web are increasingly feeding models their own exhaust. Chips have rival suppliers, talent moves between labs, but clean human data, written before the contamination began, is the one input in the AI supply chain that is genuinely scarce and getting scarcer. When something scarce becomes existential to companies worth hundreds of billions of dollars, a land grab is not a risk. It is a certainty. Now the courts. In June 2025, federal judge William Alsup handed down the most important AI copyright ruling so far, in a case authors brought against Anthropic. The ruling split the question straight down the middle. Training a model on books, Alsup found, is fair use, exceedingly transformative in his words, legally closer to a person reading and learning than to a photocopier. That half was a massive win for the labs, but the other half was not. Anthropic had downloaded millions of those books from pirate libraries instead of buying them, and fair use, the judge ruled, does not launder theft. That left the company facing a jury trial over statutory damages that can run up to $150,000 per work, multiplied across hundreds of thousands of works. Run that multiplication and you get numbers with 12 digits, an existential threat to one of the most valuable startups on the planet. So Anthropic did what the math demanded. It settled. The settlement is worth reading closely because it quietly set the market price of a human book. $1.5 billion, covering roughly 482,000 pirated works, about 91% of them claimed by authors and publishers before the deadline. A judge gave final approval this July, trimming the lawyer's fee to about $101 million, and the first payments are estimated to begin in mid-August 2026. Per book, after fees, about $3,000. Once. No royalty, no recurring license, no share of what the model earns. And critically, the settlement sets no binding precedent, which is exactly why it was worth $1.5 billion to sign. The fair use question stays half open. The training itself was already blessed, and the biggest data liability in the industry was converted into a one-time invoice. For a company valued in the hundreds of billions, $3,000 per book to make the past legal is not a punishment, it is a purchase. The Anthropic settlement closed one front. The war has several others. The New York Times versus OpenAI and Microsoft, filed back in December 2023, is still grinding through discovery in Manhattan with no trial date, and it remains the case most likely to decide whether training on paywalled journalism is fair use in America. Reddit sued Anthropic in 2025 for scraping its site, then sued Perplexity along with 3 industrial scraping firms it accuses of laundering Reddit data past its defenses, a case that is really about whether a platform can fence its users' posts. And in November 2025, the first big verdict landed in London. Getty Images largely lost to Stability AI, with the UK High Court finding that a trained model's weights are not a copy of the images it learned from. Notice the pattern across every front. Training itself keeps surviving. How the data was taken and what the model spits out is where the labs keep bleeding, which is exactly why the smart money stopped litigating and started licensing. So what does the internet's brain rent for? We now have a price list. News Corp, publisher of the Wall Street Journal, licensed its archive to OpenAI for a reported $250 million over 5 years. The New York Times, while suing OpenAI, signed with Amazon for a reported $20 to $25 million a year, which tells you the fight was never against licensing, only against taking without one. Reddit disclosed $203 million in data licensing contracts in its IPO filing, selling its users 2 decades of conversations to Google and OpenAI. The academic publisher Wiley booked $49 million of AI licensing revenue in 1 fiscal year. Shutterstock's data deals ran at $138 million a year. A real market has formed in under 3 years with going rates, brokers, and repeat customers. Phase 1 of the land grab was taking. Phase 2 is renting. But look down that list and notice who is on it. Giants, every single one. Now the other side of the ledger. The licensing market pays whoever holds a big, clean, legally unambiguous pile of content. A wire service, an academic publisher, a stock photo library, a platform with terms of service. It pays almost nobody else. The blogger whose posts trained every model on Earth has no deal and no realistic path to one, because transaction costs eat any check smaller than millions. And the deepest irony sits inside the platform deals. Reddit's $203 million is built entirely on posts its users wrote for free, upvoted for free, and moderated for free. The user's share of the data windfall is $0, and the same is true of your product reviews, your forum answers, your uploaded photos, your open source code. The internet's brain was crowdsourced from hundreds of millions of unpaid contributors, and in the land grab, the crowd is the one party with no seat at the table. The money flows to whoever holds the fence, not whoever grew the field. Meanwhile, the fence building has gone industrial. Cloudflare, which sits in front of roughly 1/5 of the web, flipped the default in July 2025. New websites now block AI training crawlers unless the owner opts in. And this September, the blocking defaults extend across ad-supported pages, with a payment system attached that has evolved from pay-per-crawl into pay-per-use, paying publishers when an AI actually uses their content in an answer. The number that justified all of it is the crawl-to-referral ratio, and it is brutal. In the old bargain, Google crawled your site and sent you readers. In the new one, Cloudflare measured AI crawlers taking roughly 1,100 pages for every visitor OpenAI sent back, and around 38,000 pages per visitor for Anthropic. The scrape-for-traffic deal that built the open web is dead, and the infrastructure layer is now metering what used to be a commons. 3 years ago, the internet's default setting was open. Watch the switch flip in real time. And when the found data runs out, you manufacture new data. This is the strangest corner of the land grab. Frontier labs now pay armies of humans, increasingly doctors, lawyers, and PhDs, to write, solve, and grade problems specifically to feed models through data labeling firms that have become some of the hottest companies in tech. How hot? Meta paid $14.3 billion for 49% of Scale AI, valuing a labeling company at $29 billion. The move backfired as rival labs fled a supplier owned by a competitor, stampeding to Surge AI, a bootstrapped firm doing around $1 billion in revenue and courting a $25 billion valuation of its own. The expert data market is in the single-digit billions today and compounding at over 50% a year. Sit with what that means. Human judgment, packaged by the task, is now a traded industrial input. The machine economy's response to running out of free human thought was to put human thought on a payroll. There is one more escape hatch: synthetic data, models generating their own training material. It genuinely works in narrow lanes, math and code especially, where a generated problem can be checked by a compiler or a proof before it is fed back in. But unsupervised, it carries a documented failure mode called model collapse. Models trained on model output drift toward mush, like a photocopy of a photocopy, and with most new web content now at least partly machine-written, the open internet is running that experiment on itself involuntarily. So the pattern across every frontier lab in 2026 is not synthetic instead of human. It is synthetic plus licensed plus commissioned, with real human data as the scarce base layer that keeps the whole diet from going circular. Which loops us back to the land grab's core logic. If human data is the one ingredient machines cannot make for themselves, then owning it, fencing it, or renting it is one of the strongest positions in the entire AI economy. Let's answer the question, who owns the internet's brain? Increasingly, whoever holds a fence. The platforms whose terms of service turn your posts into their inventory. The publishers big enough to negotiate. The labs rich enough to license, settle, and commission what they once scraped. The middlemen, labeling firms and infrastructure tollbooths, clipping the flow in both directions. History has a name for this. Enclosure, when England's common grazing land was fenced into private property and the people who had used it for centuries discovered that custom was not a deed. The open web was our commons. We wrote it together for free, and in 3 years it has been surveyed, fenced, priced, and leased, with the original authors holding, at best, a one-time check for $3,000. The machine economy runs on human thought, and the fight over who profits from it is just getting started. Tomorrow on Money Machines, the toll booth you personally pay almost every day, how Visa takes a cut of nearly everything you buy. Subscribe so you don't miss it.